Hello, and welcome to the Smells Like Infinite Sadness podcast. I'm your host, Michael Taylor. For those of you who don't know, I run the website, smellslikeinfinitesadness.com. It's a blog covering the best alternative rock from the 80s and 90s up to present day. I'm a proud middle-aged Gen Xer who is still obsessed with the music of his youth and loves to talk about it. And today's special guest is Kellii Scott, drummer for the space rock trio Failure. Failure were one of the most unique and dynamic alternative acts of the 1990s, but they flew a bit under the radar and broke up shortly after the 1996 critically acclaimed album Fantastic Planet. But the band would reunite in 2014, buoyed by a diehard fan base, many of whom discovered the group in their absence. Failure came back strong with their 2015 comeback album The Heart is a Monster, which drew critical acclaim. The band had a very busy 2018 as well, releasing a series of EPs, which eventually culminated in the full-length, epically titled album called, wait for it, In the Future, Your Body Will Be the Furthest Thing from Your Mind. This was released November 16th on the band's Failure music label. In today's interview, Scott and I discussed the new album, their creative approach behind releasing the album in installments with EPs, which tracks proved the most challenging, plans for a 2019 tour, and much more. So sit back and enjoy. All right, so I've been enjoying your guys' EPs throughout the year, and of course now you've got the full album, In the Future, Your Body Will Be the Furthest Thing from Your Mind.
Yeah, have you heard it yet?
Yeah, I've been listening to it. I've been obviously throughout the year I've listened to it, but I finally listened to the full album the past few days. So I've been really enjoying it. It's been a nice immersive listen. So it's been really, really cool.
How do you feel? Because we've been doing the EPs and I've been listening to the music for so long, like especially the first and second EP, like they're so old to me that it's a little difficult for me. And I've listened to the record a couple times, like maybe over the last week and a half. But because we didn't have all the material finished, it was really hard to listen to what it was going to sound like once it was all put together. What do you, how do you feel about the way the entire record moves from one end to the other?
I think it's great. I mean, I think it's got a very, solid flow. I like how it's got a lot of different moods going on. And, I think that's one thing I was going to ask you too, because I know that for Failure, obviously you guys put a lot of effort into the sequencing, for albums.
Yeah. No, I mean, this one, especially, the way we decided to do it, was completely opposite of the way we normally do things. One, we usually sit down and we write and record the records together. And then when we're done, we're done. This time it was just section by section, and Ken and Greg would write, and then they would, a couple weeks into it, sort of present me with demos of what they had. And then when everything was done being written, or at least for the most part, because things definitely changed from the demos, arrangements and things like that, we would go in and do a day of drums, and then the drums would be done. So we kind of did the whole thing like that. But the scarier part for me was once we do finish records, there's usually like a 2 or 3 week period where the songs are just really labored over, and the order is so meticulously like thought about, and the record's listened to over and over and over in separate orders. And, you're right. The sequencing is as much a thing as, the process of recording the record or mixing the record. Like it's its own thing that has to happen before the record's done. And in this case, by creating the artwork ahead of time and releasing the EPs the way we released them, the order was set before the songs were even written. So it was a little scary to be locked into something like that without, and there were months in between records, so you didn't really have a great idea of like what the flow was going to be while you were working on a certain batch of songs. So that was a little worrying. And like I said, I've listened to it a couple times, and I'm starting to kind of get my head around it, and nothing sticks out where, I think to myself, oh, I wish this song would have been there, or, but I'm curious as to, because it's fresh, or at least fresher to the people who are listening to it, how they feel about it, especially compared to listening to one of our other records.
Yeah, I mean, because I've listened to this, I guess, all the way through about 4 or 5 times, and I think that, it has a very good flow to it. I mean, I don't see anything that's jarring in it, and as opposed to your previous two albums, it still feels like it has that very solid overall feel to it. So I think it's really strong.
Yeah. Thank you for that, by the way. That's a serious commitment. That's 4 hours out of your life. I know how hard it is to find an hour to do something that you want to do that isn't, just sort of the regular things you have to do in life that sort of seem to fill everything up pretty quickly, not leaving much left for the liver to do for himself.
Well, what inspired you guys to try this approach versus doing the traditional album recording as in the past?
One, I think there was definitely a bit of the same thing that inspires us every time we do a record. Like, how can we do this differently? How can we keep it exciting for ourselves and challenging? But I think that accompanied with, the just sort of the underlying, like, what's going on in everyone's life factors. Mm-hmm. Each of us had stuff going on that was going to make it very difficult for us to just lock ourselves away for 6 months every day. So we just sort of, with that in mind, we just had to come up with a creative way for us all to do something new, yet be able to dedicate the amount of time to our personal lives that, given what was going on in our personal lives, we were required to do. So, it was just kind of a dovetail of how can we be creative, and this is our life today. The demands of our own personal lives, which is awesome that we as a band can sit down and tell each other, well, this is what's going on in our lives. And, this is going to be a factor in how we approach this next record. And then, secondly, the amazing thing is that we managed to turn all of that stuff, which, usually dooms and takes people out, into a creative process that, was good for everybody. I think that's definitely one thing since we've gotten back together. It's moments like those that are a big contrast as to the way that things were for us as a band in the 90s. Mm-hmm. I think those life things are one of the obviously main things that pulled us apart as a band. And now just being a little bit older and a little bit wiser, those types of things just make us stronger and pull us closer as a band.
And do you think the expectations were different this time around? Because the last time, of course, you were doing like your comeback album with The Heart is a Monster. Did the expectations feel different this time, or was the pressure less, or did it not really?
No, I mean, I don't know if it was a comeback record is just such a strong moniker. For us, the record just felt like we were picking up where we left off. Mm-hmm. A lot of time went by and things changed in our lives and in our interpersonal relationships. And we decided now is a good time for us to start making music again. There was definitely a little bit of, I think, internal pressure. Like, it's very rare that we succumb to or even acknowledge an overwhelming outside pressure. Like, what are people going to think, or how is this going to go over? Or, I think we were all concerned with, at first, but it very quickly went away as to whether, what we want to do is going to have any sort of relevancy. But, like I said, that went away pretty quickly after the first, batch of songs were written and recorded. We were very aware of what we were doing and what we had, and, that it was definitely worth pursuing, and this was going to be a great thing. I think for everybody else, but even more so for us. We're our own worst critics when it comes to stuff like that. But as far as comeback record, I don't know if it, was that big of a deal. I know that we all, not unlike this record, we just want to make great music that we would sit down in our own free time and listen to,
Mm-hmm.
and be compelled to listen to. If it doesn't meet that standard, what's the point? Especially with us, because we all have these other branches of music where we can just, continue to play music on our own with other projects and, the way we were before we got back together. So, that's kind of how I feel about all that. But this one was a little extra exciting just because of sort of the way we took this project on, just being so different. We really kind of took the safety net out from underneath ourselves this time. With the way we did the record, there were just so many ways that it could have gone wrong.
Well, I know you're mentioning your concerns about how it would end up as a finished piece, but was it nice to get feedback from the fans by releasing it kind of in installments and getting more of an immediate feedback from them throughout the year?
It is on a, obviously a personal level. As a musician, when you create something and put it out, like, you want to know that it's resonating with, people that love your music, and it's also attracting like new people, sort of under the umbrella. I think at the same time, it also makes you, again, with the way we chose to do this record, like, we picked the artwork and the sequenced songs before we had anything written or recorded. I think it highlights also sort of that question of, is this going to be as good as the other records? Like, have we doomed ourselves? Like, is there a big problem coming up that we're not able to see because we've kind of put the cart before the horse on this one? So, in that way, maybe there, for me, maybe there's a little extra personal pressure, because it's resonating so much with the fans, with the people that love our music. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. No,
I kind of feel like I just talked myself into a full circle.
No. No, that makes sense.
But that's a personal, I'm just telling you, like, from my perspective, there isn't at any point where, as a group, we're sitting down, like, questioning any of this stuff aloud. And I think there are definitely a lot of personal fears and questions that we all have that we don't vocalize, that don't become part of sort of the band psyche. And I think that's a good thing too. I think when you're making music, like, the last thing you want to do is use your brain. There shouldn't be any of those, like, types of sort of, fears and questions and, just all that weird stuff that we all do all day long, to get through every 24 hours. The beauty of playing music is, you have that moment where that part of your brain and pain turns off and you get, like, an escape. The making of the music is like the eye of the hurricane, where everything's nice and quiet and peaceful. That's kind of how I feel about that. We're a band and we're a tight unit. We just, once we have our mind set on something, we just kind of plunge in and keep sort of, browbeating forward.
So you're mentioning that you had the album, a title and then the songs picked, the song titles picked out before you wrote anything. So was everything that we hear in the album, was it all written linearly, or did it?
Well, the titles weren't picked out. The titles came as, like, if we came up with the artwork and there were just dots. There weren't any actual titles for the songs yet. There were titles for the sections of the EP. Like, we had one main title, and we knew if we broke it up into 4 releases, each release would be called this section of the title of the record. And we had the artwork, but the title of the songs, like, those came as we were writing them. And the writing of the songs they were similar to the way we normally do it. When we do a record, no matter how the actual physical process of it, we write a song. While we're recording the drum part, we're arranging the song. And then there's, like a week or sometimes 2 spent doing vocals and overdubs. And then there's a pretty good mix of the song. And then we're done with that song and we move on to the next one. Who's got an idea? Okay, let's go with that idea. And we start turning that idea into a song. And that's kind of, everything is almost always written like that. We never go back and forth between songs. We start a song, we finish a song, we start working on the next one.
Okay.
So in that way, the record was just like all the other records. There's not a whole lot of back and forth.
Well, what I like about this album, like I was mentioning before, I like how there's so many different types of moods and structures and it's got a real varied feel. And I really like Paralytic Flow a lot. I think it's got a very powerful performance for you, particularly on the drums. Was that a challenging one for you to play as far, since it's such a dynamic one percussion wise, or?
Paralytic Flow, no. That one was just very supernatural, felt very failure. No, that one in particular was definitely really natural and pretty simple. And again, like, it depends. I don't remember having that section of songs. I don't remember having to do a lot of, like, when they give me the demos, I usually go to a studio a couple times a week. With that one, I think I made like 2 or 3 trips to the studio just to get all of my patterns and the arrangement of what I was going to do, and any sort of other ideas, like if I wanted to drastically change parts from what was on the original demo that they had given me. But that batch of songs in general was pretty quick and pretty easy. And I think that's actually where we started to add a 5th song. Like, the first batch of songs, we went in and we recorded 4 songs in the day. And then that second batch of songs, we recorded those 4 songs and had some time left over to start a demo for a song that would be on the 3rd EP. So it's generally, as we got the hang of it, it started to get a bit easier. And again, I mean, I was putting in the work, so I was prepared before, it was the day to record the drums. The one song that probably gave me the most difficulty was Distorted Fields. Ken had, I can't remember what I was doing. I had gotten home and there was an email in my inbox. Greg was out of town. He was doing the Perfect Circle stuff. And there was a song that Ken had emailed the both of us that was, for the most part, completely finished. There were a couple parts on his demo that turned into other instruments, and there were a couple other melodies and guitar parts and stuff like that added, but for the most part, the demo was done. There was a full realized drum part. Everything was there. Unfortunately, the drum part that he had written couldn't be played by a person. So that one in particular, I mean, the beat itself is not easy to play. There's just a lot of the syncopation with a lot of the left foot, right foot stuff, is a little challenging to sort of get the hang of and make a natural thing, for the player. Because, he played everything with his fingers, there were a few things in the original beat that just couldn't be played by a human. And I was kind of stumped on it. And there was like a week where like, am I being lazy? Cause I actually had to give the drum part to a couple other friends of mine who were like just really spectacular drummers, who I know that like there literally there's nothing that they can't play. Like they're just really incredible clinicians, and they basically gave me feedback, cause I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't giving up on this part. They affirmed my opinion. They were like, yeah, this can't be played. And one of them actually was like, well, this can actually be played, but as a drummer, you would never want to play this the way it appears because it just wouldn't feel right. And you would never get it to move and groove the way you would actually want it to as a live person. So with that, I actually spent like 2 to 3 times a week, from just a few hours, like at the end of the day, like I wasn't getting home until like midnight, working on this song and trying to figure out a way first to play it. And secondly, to keep the essence of the song without like, what happens if I take out like this note, and what happens if I take out this note, or what if I play this note here instead of there? Like just figuring out a way to make it feel natural without ruining the essence of, I mean, as soon as I heard it, I was like, holy shit, this is a great drum beat. I got to figure out a way to play this. Like, this is just so cool. So it was a personal challenge for me, stylistic wise. And it had me reaching for something that I just never even thought of trying to play something like that before. Not unlike, like that song from Magnified. What is that song called? No, the one with the fast tom stuff that was programmed also, like a human can't even play it. Yeah, Wet Gravity. Like Wet Gravity is like that also, because Ken and Greg did that record like right as I was joining the band, and a lot of that stuff was programmed. So it took a little finessing to turn it into something that a real drummer would play.
Mm-hmm.
Not a real drummer, but a live drummer. It had to be playable. But Wet Gravity in particular, the chorus beat was, it was bordering on needing another appendage to make it physically playable for a person. Not unlike, this one. The only difference being on this one, I had to learn it before the fact and record it on the record. That one, I had to learn it after the fact and be able to play it, live. So that was definitely the most challenging one. All of the other songs came fairly quickly and just felt fairly really natural, and they were all just sort of within my wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm. But no, I think that makes sense. I guess this was this the first time since you've been in the band that you've used a electronic drums to complement your playing, or is this the first?
Well, no, there's no on the record. There's no electric drums. Everything is played on a drum set by a person. I'm just talking about the demos, the programming that Ken had done.
Oh, okay.
That had to be turned into a real person before we actually went and recorded the song. That was kind of the process a lot on this record. Like when they wrote something and created a demo, there was always like a guide drum track there. Sometimes it was really similar to what the end was going to be. A lot of times you kind of have to take it and, sort of, for me anyway, like creatively, I want to add something to it or interpret it like how I would interpret it. Or, sometimes I would just completely rewrite the beat. But to Ken and Greg's credit, I mean, a lot of what was on the demo, the drum parts anyway, are what appears on the record. They have a way of, their version of a demo is most people's version of this is our record. Like they're pretty flushed out and fully realized.
Well, one thing I was listening to on the album, I really like the closing song, the Pineal Electorate, and it.
Oh yeah.
And it's got a very kind of Beatles psychedelic feel, and I know that reminded me a little bit of Mulholland Drive off The Heart Is a Monster. Yep. So was that kind of a sequel to that in a way, or is that kind of inspired by that song, or did it just kind of happen to kind of share some similarities?
Yeah, I think as Greg, his writing style has definitely developed in, if you go back to Fantastic Planet, there's The Nurse, which shares a lot of those qualities. But yeah, Mulholland Drive. And, I just think that's a part of his writing style that he's sort of, is in his arsenal now. Mm-hmm. He really loves writing like that. I mean, that's the beauty of Ken and Greg, and the reason we're able to make such long, sprawling pieces of music, like records. I mean, not too many people can string together an hour of music. That's a lot, especially for the listener. But because there's so much style within the two of them and their ability to sort of just write really rich and different stuff. It's not like treading on the same ground over and over and over. The more we write and the more records we make, it seems like each time, like a few new types of riffs come out. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's something that, Greg especially is just really developing that style of writing within his arsenal. And then you have in complete contrast, like, Apocalypse Blooms or, any of the 4 songs on sort of what you would call EP4 or the last 4, all of those songs are so different from one another. Mm-hmm. But they're essentially coming out of the same person.
So is there like a percentage wise that each of them contribute? I mean, does it kind of like Ken puts a batch in that was like 1 EP, or Greg puts in a batch, or was it just pretty evenly distributed throughout the recording process? I was curious about that.
Well, if you're looking at, like, in terms of who physically wrote parts, there's definitely a distribution process, but I think more importantly, when it comes to a Failure record, you have to look at the entire record as a whole. I think it's only when you look at it from up above that you see that it takes 3 people to equally contribute to one of these records for it to be what a person is going to get when it's done. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're the type of band where you can really just look at it in like, oh, well, who wrote each section of each song and what's that percentage? I mean, you've got Ken, for starters, is like literally setting up the recording studio and facilitating all of the sounds, all of the mixing, there's so much. We're not your normal band where all we do is the music. Like, we literally make all of our own records. It's not like we have a guy that comes in and does all of that stuff, and then the band is only left with the musical part of it. Mm-hmm. So I kind of like would like to sort of stay out of the area of, for me personally, I prefer to look at the whole record from up above instead of getting into you know, dissecting it and giving everyone percentage points as to this is their only contribution.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
No, that totally makes sense. Because I mean,
I think that formula works with probably a lot of bands. You know, you always have that one guy that writes everything, and then, you know, people come in and sort of contribute their parts or not. I just don't think that we're that type of band that fits within that sort of formula. You know, we're all one part of a whole. You know, and I think that's part of what keeps it really rich and compelling and creative and, you know, internally. I think that's why we work so well together. And
I was kind of curious too. I know that Greg has said in his press release for the album that a lot of his themes were kind of social media and how it's kind of isolating people and the issues it's causing. But of course, to be a band in the 21st century, you know, social media is so important to connecting with your fans and to letting people know about, you know, your releases and tours and whatnot. So is that more of a necessary evil, or do you guys have a positive, I guess, how does that kind of play into, you know, into keeping failure going as far as interacting with your fans? And is there kind of a positive and negative aspect to the social media for y'all?
Well, I mean, that question, I mean, I can only speak to that personally. When it comes to, you know, there are many times where I ask Greg what a song's about, and he's like pretty guarded about stuff. Honestly, there's a lot of stuff on our records that I have no idea what it's about. Like literally Stuck on You, I had no idea what it was about until like 15 years later. It dawned on me that it was a song about a hit song, like getting stuck in your brain. So, you know, for me personally, when I'm sitting down and working on music and coming up with parts and, you know, just doing all the stuff that it takes me, that I do to contribute to a song while we're recording and writing and all of that stuff, you know, I don't at any point think about this thing called social media. It just isn't something that works its way into my personal life. I'm not a person that sits on their phone all day. Like that's not part of what I do. Although I will say in the time, the importance of social media, and I fully embrace it. You know, people are people. If there wasn't this thing called social media, you would see good and bad things in people because of something else. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily think that social media is the culprit with the seeming distance that it's creating between people. I think people innately have that distance from one another. Mm-hmm. And I only know that because I'm pretty much the polar opposite. Like, I love being close to people. I love being like really honest and open with people. That's one of the things that makes me as a person feel like I'm a very small part of a very big thing. And I sort of find my security as a person who sometimes feels alone in this great big world. You know, in that place, I think we all need one another, and I love personal relationships and meeting people. And, you know, I'm not afraid of people. I don't distance myself from the rest of humanity. I see the similarities between all of us. We're all just afraid and want to be loved. You know, that underlying fear for each individual causes them to live their life in a different way. Mm-hmm. Some people are more comfortable being behind a screen and being who they are. I'm just not like that. And I don't think that the screen is necessarily the culprit. I think people have always been like that. I mean, you can trace it back for every single person to a kindergarten playground.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, so people are people. I don't see the evil in social media, and it's just, you know, how people generally are. Again, I mean, if there wasn't this thing called social media, they would figure out a way to, you know, create that distance themselves. I do see there is an innately good in that. I think people should be able to express themselves however they get to do that. And if a person finds that place behind a screen, I'm all for it. People are creative beings and they should be able to express themselves one way or another. And if that's what makes them comfortable being a part of this big thing we call the world, so be it. But as far as a creative outlet and a way to sort of get our music out there, I mean, one thing that is very obvious is, or at least to me, when we did Fantastic Planet and we broke up and we weren't a band for 15 years or 16 years, however long that was, somehow our music got spread way further on its own by people doing what they do. I love this, putting it up online somewhere and spreading it to another person, and that other person doing it, spreading it to another person, or, so that thing happened because of technology and the internet and the Facebooks and the Instagrams and, back in the day, all of those sort of sharing sites, so I embrace that. I mean, if it weren't for that, I don't think that we could have gotten back together and had an audience that would sort of sustain us, that we could go out and make records and be able to pay for them and do tours and be able to pay for them. And so in that way, I think it's a really great thing. In another way, the internet is so big and there's so much information and there's so many bands. And, I know that there's a flip side of the coin where there are thousands, tens of thousands of other bands that will never get heard. Because there's so much space and there's so much competition for that space. Not unlike radio. Radio was the same way. That's how you reached a broader audience, and you had to be positioned in the perfect spot in order to get that radio slot. So your message was spread to music listeners. It's not unlike the same thing. But, again, in our case, and in my case, I mean, I see the good in technology and all of this stuff. And I personally love it. Like, I love talking to people that love our music. And, it really gives me personally a sense of humility in just the idea that right now, while you and I are sitting on the phone, somebody somewhere is listening to our new record. And for that hour, like, they're being pulled out of their lives and they're just transfixed on this thing that is making them feel something. Or they're relating, or, it's that to me is the most amazing gift, is that, I know how important it is that there are things like that out there where you can just leave the hustle and bustle and the stress and tension of your life and escape into something that just, transcends and takes you to another place above it all. That's what music has always done for me, whether it's my music or the music that I grew up listening to and that I love to listen to, or that I go to just to step out of life for a second. So in that way, being able to moment by moment connect with someone who is getting that feeling through what we do is, I mean, it's crazy. Like, to say that it's humbling, I mean, that's just an understatement. I mean, it's nuts. And I mean, I personally love that part of it.
Well, you were talking about how Fantastic Planet was kind of able to blossom, in the time that you were apart. Did you have any inkling after that was out and you guys broke up that maybe someday it would find an audience, or was that a complete surprise, or was there kind of like the hope that you're like, maybe this will survive us and eventually find its audience?
Total surprise. I don't think any of us knew that, because as you're walking through life, like every now and again you meet someone that's like, oh, you were in that band. God, I loved that record. And it's just that moment that begins and ends, and then you're just walking through life again. When we got back together and we started to book that first tour, we literally, we started with one show in LA, and our thinking was, and this just says everything, let's book a place that isn't so big that it's not at least going to look full. So going with that notion, honestly, yeah, we had no idea that people were going to show up. We just wanted to play that first show and not be completely embarrassed that we had booked a place that was too big, that was empty. In all honesty, and we did it months in advance so we could promote it and like just give people time to sort of trickle in and, gobble up the tickets over a 4 or 5 month period. And it wasn't until we got feedback from our agent. He's like, guys, like we put this show on sale and all the tickets were gone in like less than 5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
It was like, what? So, that was a pretty overwhelming feeling. At that point we were like, okay, well, maybe there's something here. Let's put our whole foot in instead of just the big toe, and let's book a tour. And then, we booked the tour and we started to see that people were buying tickets, but then we played that first show and nobody knew that we were going to book a tour. So that show was attended by young kids, old kids, people from South Africa, Australia, the UK, like all over the United States. Like people traveled, some of them long distances to be there.
Amazing.
So I think that's when it really dawned on us that, wow, like there's an audience for what we do. Because otherwise we would have had no way of ever knowing. I personally, before that, I'm still not a big internet person. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on a computer before then. I've never really been a computer person. I definitely am more so now. I work at a software company, oddly enough. Yeah, we just, to answer to your question is, yeah, we would have never known until we actually got back together and started booking shows, and then we put up our social media page. And that's when, sort of the direct contact with people outside of driving to their city and running into them between the stage and, going to the next city.
And speaking of a tour, now that you guys had a chance to, get that full album out and all of that, do you guys have a tour in the works, or will there be some dates for 2019?
We are definitely going to tour in 2019. There's some rumblings behind the works. We're definitely going to do some of our own stuff and put together a tour in 2019. But I think there's also going to be us and another band. You never know with these types of things. We put it out there. They want to do it. We want to do it. They have a new record coming out too. So hopefully, we can make it happen. So there's some rumblings of us and another band that I personally think would be just totally awesome. We're going to definitely do some stuff, by ourselves. I think like we have for, the previous record. I guess they usually call it a night with. I don't know if you've been to any of those. Like since we've gotten back together, we've done a few tours where it's just been us. and we sort of built a night of entertainment with no opening bands. Like, we've had films that we've created, and, you know, we've split our sets into threes and played for like 2 hours. And it's just been really, really cool to have a night. And I think also from the perspective of an audience member, it's something kind of new and different. Unless you're going to a Rush show. Rush is really kind of the only band I can think of that when you show up to their show, there's no opening band. It's just Rush for 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Although, I mean, you know, obviously we're nothing like Rush. Answer your question, yes. We are talking about it, and, you know, starting to put some stuff together and figure out everybody's schedules and other bands that we'd like to tour with, schedules, and I'm hoping as early as like March.
Oh, great.
Yeah, end of February, March.
Well, I hope y'all will make it down to Austin, because I've seen you guys played here about 3 times. So.
Oh, we always play Austin.
So it's
Austin is one of those. So you have to play Austin.
You guys, I saw you guys at the Mohawk and at Emos, and both were great shows.
The Mohawk, that was when we did the Fantastic Planet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was actually. I'm pretty sure there are some cuts on the live record from the Mohawk. I'm actually, now that I think of it, I'm certain there's at least one of the performances from the Mohawk. That was a great show. A weird place, like the way the stage was like really tight, and
it is.
That was a good performance for us because we were so on top of one another. I think, didn't we blow out the PA at one point?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
I thought there was like somewhere in the first or second song, the PA blew out, so we had to stop and start again.
Yeah. It is a weird venue. It's got a very strange setup for sure.
Yeah, I mean, but it's I like playing when we're really tight and crunched together. Like, for me anyway, there's a great chemistry when we're all close to one another. It gets a little bit weirder when you like have to put your glasses on to see, you know, Greg way over there in the corner of an auditorium, you know, like 50 yards away. I prefer those types of gigs where you're just really on top of one another and sharing the sweat, and, you know, my smile turns into Ken's smile, turns into Greg's smile. Like, I don't know. I just think it's cool in venues like that.
Great. Well, I think that covers all my questions. I wish you guys luck with the album. Is there anything else you want to say to the fans as far as before we wrap up that you want to express about the new album? Or?
You know, I think I'd just like to leave it pretty much the way I always do. I mean, you know, with just reiterating the importance of, you know, as much as we love what we do and getting in there and creating records, I mean, honestly, there's no way that we would be able to do any of this without the listeners. I mean, that's, as far as failure goes, the listener is as an important part of what we do as each one of us. You know, it really is like the fourth member. You know, it takes one to have the other. So, I would just, you know, again, like to say thank you for that.
Great. Well, I love the album. I wish you guys luck with it. And thanks so much for talking to me today. It's been a real pleasure.
Cool. Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
All right. You have a great day. Thank you so much.
You too. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
A big thanks to Kellii Scott for taking the time out to do the interview today. You can buy Failure's new album, And the Future of Your Body Will Be the Furthest Thing from Your Mind, via the band's website, which you can find by going to failurebandmerch.com, or you can also go to pledgemusic.com/project/failure/LP5, or if you go to my website, smellslikeifitnesssadness.com, you can see a blog post for this particular episode, and you can download it via Amazon. I have to admit, I'm very curious about Kelly's comment about the upcoming tour next year with a mysterious band that also has a new album coming out. I'm wondering, given that Maynard James Keenan is a huge fan of Failure, if that might just be a package tour with Tool. That's my theory at the moment, but that could be wrong. Especially if Tool's album turns out not to be coming out in 2019, even though Maynard promises that it will. We'll have to see, but I'm excited to see those guys no matter who they tour with next year. It should be a lot of fun. Anyways, we're going to close today's episode out with a track off the new album entitled Heavy and Blind. So check that out. Hope you enjoy it, and we'll talk to you soon.